All right. Well, welcome back, everyone. So we're back in the boardroom. Had a little brief interlude there, and just a continuation of the workshop that we started out on the field at 5 o'clock. So for any new attendees, we've already done the pledge. We've already done a roll call. We are just resuming the previous meeting that started at 5 o'clock. So we are here now, and Mike, thank you for the tour and the information. We really appreciate that. Want to spend the next 20 minutes or so talking previous bond attempts. And so just wanted to discuss that a little bit, give board members an opportunity to share their thoughts. I think the one thing that I would ask the group is, if we're looking past bond, it would be good to look at results more so than what worked, what didn't work, just from an activity standpoint, because it's really easy 2 years later to say, well, we should have done this, we should have done that. So I'd ask that we keep a lot of that in the next steps. What do we want to do differently? So instead of looking back too much, let's look forward at what we want to try to accomplish if and when we decide to go out again. So hopefully that makes sense, and we're all good with that. So with that, I'd like to just throw it to the board and what's on your mind? What are thoughts that you want to share regarding past bond elections? I'll start. I do think, one of the things that we learned 2 times ago was to really make sure that we do a solid job of polling to get the pulse of the community, and really make sure that we feel good about how engaged the community is in it and how in favor the community is in it before we put it on the ballot. And so I definitely think as we look at the last time, it's been a crazy political world. Elections can be highly contested these days. And so there's some thought was put into that as well this last go around as far as voter turnout. But I don't feel as though that we had the stats that we wanted to see before going out. And so I think that's definitely a deliverable as we move forward. If we're going to set targets of where we want that support and strong support, then really holding those lines to ensure that we have what we expect to help deliver success. So that's my start off discussion.
To piggyback on Chair Idell's opener, 2016 we lost by I think 538 votes. 237 would have swung it, 238, something like that. And then we lost ground in 2020. I think some of the strong things we did in 2016 were that there was that grassroots part of it. There was people kind of on the ground. There was a community component to it, a little bit more so than the 2020 version. 2020 was just a wild card. We had a multitude of things going on in the community, as we all know. And timing, I don't think, was in our favor, but we did lose ground as far as the total votes go. One thing that was a kind of a surprise and a wild card was the amount of voter turnout change from 2016 to 2020. And I'm sure Maggie has these numbers handy, or somebody else might, but it was significant. I think we were planning on 7,000 total voters, and it was closer to 9,000 or something of that nature, 6,000 and 8,000 from 2020 to 2016 to 2020. So I don't think we're going to see that decrease anytime soon with the amount of housing that's going in the Estacada area. I think people are willing to be more involved with things. We just need to get the right amount of people on our side of the bond conversation to make one of these go. And I think whatever we choose to do moving forward, that grassroots component has to play a part in this community. It's worked in 2001 when the original current bond was passed. It happened with the library bond. And I think it just is, for a community our size, it has to be there. And the board has to be behind it too. And I can raise my hand and say that I wasn't fully committed in the 2020 bond, so just putting that out there.
I think we've got an uphill battle, and I think our major problem is the economy, the inflation. It's a tough time when your people are paying, $1 more a gallon for gas, and it's, I talk to people all the time, and it's getting tougher and tougher out there. Now, if somehow the economy turns around, I think we've got a good chance. But not in this environment. I just don't see it personally. I'd love to see it.
I think one area that I wonder if maybe in my mind was going to swing for us a yes vote was the new people that moved into the community. Those increase in voters, and I was hoping that increase in voter turnout was those younger families who were maybe wanting to invest in the schools and such. But I do think that without that grassroots and I know myself personally was not as involved and engaged as I, was in the 2016, because I was a part of the PAC at that point and not on the school board. And so I do know how that was, a little bit different. And I was a part of this last time, the committee that was put together to create the package that was presented. And I know that the people who spent their time there really, cared, but I definitely feel like we didn't have the involvement, engagement, and numbers we needed to really get some momentum going and make sure that we were representing the community properly. And so I think that, those factors are important for us to consider going forward.
The people that I have talked to concur of the new families that are coming in. However, that's also bringing in a lot of new taxes. And they ask me and they say, hey, we're getting more tax revenue in. Why do we need a bond? Good, it's a valid point.
Sure. It is, but it's similar to saying I got a raise, so I'm going to do a remodel on a house. It's such a small blip on the radar when it comes to our tax base and what we see. It's not enough to say, okay, we need a $55 million upgrade, because the money's just not there. Now, we are seeing more on the tax rolls, but it's not going to be enough to take on one of these bigger projects. It's going to be in the millions, not the hundreds of thousands or whatever. So I get it, John. I mean, I hear the same thing, and I try to have that conversation with people of, hey, we're seeing that, and it's helping, but it's not a big enough bump to get us onto one of these big projects, what needs to happen.
And there's a couple major components to that too, and I think, Christina, you can speak to this much more intelligently than the rest of us, but there's a charge that's a tax that's charged on new construction that's just a one-timer, right? And it's $1 a square foot?
Yes, currently.
And so that money comes to the school district and can only be used for capital improvements. So it can't be used for instruction or anything else like that, correct me if I'm wrong?
Correct.
Yep.
So that's a one-timer. After that, that doesn't get paid again. And then with how property taxes are handled and divvied out to the schools, I think that's where
Yeah.
Christina can give some really good insight.
Exactly what I was going to go to. So the property taxes is part of our state school funding formula, so it balances it out. The more property taxes, the less money the state is going to put in. So they still average us to get the same amount per student, whether we get it through property taxes or through state funding, we get the same amount. So the more property taxes we get, the less state funding we get. Does that make sense?
Because it's really tied to
And
the
that's-
number of students that we have. And so
Correct.
that's where that comes into play, is that it's not like the property taxes in Estacada are held here locally and go directly to school district. Property taxes go from homeowners, property owners to Salem, and then Salem says, this is how much we're going to give Estacada.
Yes.
And it really is delved out based on the number of students. So if we added 100 students, we get money for 100 more students. That's the increase, right? It's not because property taxes went up and I'm paying more on my house, more of that goes to the school. It's still based on a dollar amount per student, and that's how it's delved out. So that's where there's a disconnect there when you think about, gosh, my property taxes went up $1,000 this year. But if we didn't get any more students, the school doesn't get any more dollars from that. And it's only the ADM, which is the amount paid to the school per student. That's the only plus or minus that happens when it comes to taxes.
And that is for the general fund, which is our operating budget. That is not intended to support the maintenance of our schools.
Correct. That's the one-timer tax for new
Well,
construction.
Correct. That's the only money that we get from counties or cities is the SDC,
SDC.
that is the one-time money.
So one other thing while we're talking about taxes is, what was it, mid-90s that measured 95 and 5 were passed. And they locked in all property tax rates at that current value, and then there's a 3% escalator each year, is that correct? And so the benefit of a house that was built pre-95 is you're based off of a lower number. And so a lot of these people that have been in the community for a while, I don't want to say it, but their reality is different than my reality that has a newer house that's been built within the last 5 years or last year or whatever, one of these people out here, because those houses are based off of market value. So if you looked at a 1,700 square foot house that's built yesterday versus in 91, it's a significant difference, all things remaining equal. Where the increased amount of tax payers helps is on that bond specifically. So when you go back to 2001, and correct me if I'm wrong, because I'm in my own world here, but where it helps is we locked in a $25.1 million bond in 2001, and then we said it was going to be about $2 per thousand. And over time, that goes like this, depending on what's happening with the state and economy and everything else. Well, as we add taxpayers to that, we still owe that same amount across the board, but as we add taxpayers, that amount actually declines. And everybody should be able to look from their tax receipts from 2002 till now, and that rate should, on average, go down because there's more people paying into that $25 million bond.
And in fact, it has gone down.
It has.
The average was like $1.19, I think, the last time we looked at it. Don't quote me on that number, but it was significantly lower than what the original passer rate was because there's more people paying on that dollar, so it's less per person. So we don't get a bonus. We don't get extra money when there's more taxes and more people paying taxes. It just reduces the individual's liability so that the total number is the same at the end of the year.
And one argument that goes along with that I hear in the community frequently is, well, if I have extra money coming in, I would pay my mortgage down so I'd pay it off sooner. Well, it doesn't really work like that because we locked it in at a 25-year bond, and we have to pay that consistently over those 25 years, right?
Right, we would have to take it to refinance if we wanted to. That would cost us more money.
So it's not that we're taking that money and using it elsewhere. We're just following what the original bond set forth. And that's being spread over more people, which is less dollars per household, essentially. And so hopefully as that translates into a new bond, or new bond talk eventually, is that we're sprinkling that over a bigger tax base. And so $1 per thousand, we have all this additional thousands of dollars of tax assessed value in the city of, or in the Estacada zip code and Eagle Creek zip code, Estacada School District area, that should be sprinkled out and we should be able to get more for a $55 million bond as far as dollars per thousand go. Does that make sense?
Yes, so just to help explain, there's a different, on your property tax breakout, there's the lines where it says like Schools of Estacada, ESD, that's money that goes to the state, and it's divvied out for everybody. It's a formula that goes out to everyone. Then there's a small little line that says school district bond, and that's what you're talking about right now. And that, we can't collect more than what we owe. And so we collect what is there to make payments. It's just like you said, divvied out differently. So just wanting to explain that a little bit.
I think that's really helpful to understand. I mean, as far as, we look at the monies and stuff, but since I want to pull us back to the past bond conversation, and I know we wanted to look at numbers, and because I think that was one thing we felt like we were missing is like, who were the strongest no's and who were the strongest yeses, just to kind of give us an idea of general demographics of our community. Is this an appropriate time to pull us back to that?
I just wanted to add, the conversation we're having right now about taxes seemed to be the number one
Yes.
defeater of having the bond go through. And it makes sense, the rationale why. But I also think that some of the things that we just talked about are not understood across the public. And that doesn't mean that they don't look at their taxes. That just means that how that money is then distributed back to the school district of Estacada is not completely understood. And to the point where if there's more people living in a community, the assumption is there's more tax dollars than to, associated to the school district, which is not always the case. So I do think that, well, from what I've heard in the conversations I had, that was the number one barrier. And I do think that that's the one barrier we would have to, there are others, but I think that that was the number one barrier we have to overcome.
And I
If we
agree.
did plan, I'm sorry.
No, go ahead.
If we plan to go back out again, that is the number one barrier.
And I agree. I mean, I think that whatever we decide after this conversation, I think that if we could some way, shape, or form this conversation, put it out there in the community as visual slides of percentages in a very simplified form, I think that that would really help our community really understand, because some of them don't even know, how do we track all these dollars? So I think that if we could create something very simplified and visual, would help us continue this conversation and explain that to our community and saying, something that we could carry as well. And when the question is being asked, I could just pull it out and say, okay, because it's gonna be hard for me to remember everything we just talked about. And, so that would be my suggestion.
So I'm trying to understand, I think I've got this right now. We have, let's say, 100 students. And all of a sudden, we've got 200 students. So we get monies from the state for those 200 students.
Yep.
And so that is an increase in revenue that we do get, and that's the bottom line. We do have an increase in revenue. So,
But that revenue is not for capital improvements, that's to fund the teachers and all of the functionality within the district. That's what those dollar amounts are set. So that's where, when Ben started it off, there's additional revenue, but it's not anywhere near what it would take to do a 20 to
Right.
$50 million, fix, right? So yeah, there is an increase in revenue, but it almost is exactly the revenue and then what it costs to be able to support those additional 100 students.
Right.
That's how that dollar amount is set.
right. And I think that's where it's more important, like I was saying at the football field, getting community participation, get them involved. There are a lot of us out there, and I include myself, that are willing to help and to bring that dollar value down.
Yep.
And I think if we show that to the community, like we did with the baseball fields, I think we'll have a much better opportunity to get that bond passed.
Yeah, and I think we've got a longer conversation later in the board meeting on that one too.
Yep.
So I'm gonna pause this because I know we're coming up on our time and we really want to get to demographics or not demographics, but precinct information and stuff. So if we can shuffle to that, that would be super.
I'll go through in the interest of time and just go over to precinct numbers really quickly. So what you're looking at now is a breakdown of November 2020 votes that came in. Precinct 106 is the city of Estacada. So when we're talking about new families moving into, for example, Campanella or one of those neighborhoods up on the hill, we do see that we won the bond in that area, but it's just not enough to compensate for our rural areas, nor do we want that voice to drown out the voice of the rural areas. If you look at 360 is the Eagle Creek area. That's a pretty large number, and there's substantial work to be done in the Eagle Creek area. With the polling that we just did in October, we actually saw that number decrease. We were only losing by 5 points. Which is sizable. I think during the time of the fires, they had the Dowdy Creek fire and things of that nature. It did impact that. We also see the number of undervotes is pretty interesting. I mean, you add up these 25, 70, 19 votes, and what an undervote is they cast their ballot, they voted, they maybe voted on the presidential election. They were not invested enough to vote on the school bond. So even though they turned in their ballot, they did not have a say in the school bond. So that's really important in getting the word out so that we don't have as many undervotes. And then if you look on the far right column, you'll see the turnout percentage. We did have really high turnout. I mean, in the 80s, That's predicted for a highly contested presidential election, but that is something that we continue to see in polling works in our favor. When we have more people turning out, believe it or not, we have a more advantageous field. So we would still want to consider going out in November in the future. It's good to see that high turnout percentage. So yeah, we win in the city of Estacada. We still have a lot of work to do in our more rural areas.
Is there a map that's associated with the precincts?
We don't have a map with them. I do have a code that I could put in the minutes that sent over that has what each one is broken down as. We have 350 is more of the Colton area. We have the 363 and 364 is more of the George and Dover area. And then you work down in there and just see some of those smaller outlying areas.
What's 361 and 362?
61 and 362.
Umala.
Were you able to?
Garfield, Squaw Mountain is 361.
I think Eagle Fern Park goes into one of those too.
Eagle Fern, I read some of the addresses too, and it's kind of split between that George area and it's torn into a couple, so it's a little funky the way it's divided up. The rural areas, we definitely saw a major loss in.
Okay. I think as you look at like precinct 360 in Eagle Creek, I think it's a fairly well-known thing that we don't occupy Eagle Creek Elementary as an elementary school anymore. That or
Keep going, no, it's the
passing
timer.
time?
Yeah.
Shall you leave? And so there's those pedigree or heritage people that, they really want that piece of school district there. We are occupying it with the summit, but I think there's still those people that, have historically wanted Eagle Creek Elementary. I don't know, Denise, do you know of any of those kind of people since you're from that area historically?
Yeah.
But we've got great representation now with Rosa out in that area and as well as Will up in George. And so I feel like we can turn that corner and make a difference by having people that are active and known in the community. And the other thing is the reason we don't have an elementary school is we don't have as many kids out there. And it doesn't justify opening that school when we can bus them to the River Mill or the Adams River and not have that building open. So it's an uphill battle for a precinct like that, but if we can get 100 votes out of that or 200 votes out of that and swing it to less of a no, we're on the right direction.
So Maggie, you said you can get us this with the description of those precincts so that we
Yes.
can just get a better understanding. I think that's one of the most important things that we'd like to see from an area standpoint. So any other questions on
Yeah, I've got one.
precinct? Yeah.
I know in the political arena, we get a much better turnout during a presidential election than we do during the interim. Has anybody looked at that as far as how well we do if it's a presidential election vis-a-vis an interim election?
Great question. We do, when we do polling, we poll a May electorate and a November electorate. It's much more favorable in November because we do get larger voter turnout and we get some of those people that generally support school bonds more. So I would highly recommend mostly just considering the November election. We're also riding off of the success of the start of the school year, and we also get to have a great financial conversation as people get their property tax statements in. So November is just a good time to have a school bond in our community.
I will say the last two bonds we've gone out have been presidential election years,
Yeah.
just to say.
Hotly contested ones.
Highly contested,
yeah.
so I see the point. I know Jeremy was very pro-November as well when we were talking to him.
I'll show some of the polling data later on. We win with low propensity voters. We win by about 20 points with low propensity voters. Low propensity voters do not turn out in the spring. We see the older voters, we see the people that have never had students in our schools, and we are losing by a very vast amount. We also generally see more Republicans in areas like this, which we know we generally lose with Republicans as well.
Gotcha. Cool. Okay, anything else on precinct info before we transition?
Thank you, Maggie.
Okay, so we have got time now for future focus. So again, no little starred items in there, right? This is a very broad topic, so I guess if anybody has something they'd like to kick it off with, I think, Ryan, you might have something that you wanted to share.
Sure, I can, or I'll actually defer to Maggie if you'd like to just have Maggie review very quickly some of the highlights of the polling survey that we most recently did.
Perfect.
So I'll go through, I know many of you have already seen this, so I just shortened it down to the most impactful slides. We did polling in October, early October. It was great to see the landscape post-fire, post kind of settling into COVID. We polled 400 likely voters. We based it off of the November 2022 electorate, 95% level of confidence. And so here's what we're looking for, a viability for a bond. We should see support in the mid-50s. So we want to see 55 or higher, closer to 60 would make my heart sing. Intensity of support should be about 40%. And that super intense, strong no voters should be around 25% or less. That tells us that the community is really all in and they're telling us to move ahead with this. So here's what we're at right now currently. We tested with 3 different price points. We had the incredibly unique opportunity to test 2 of those price points would be a tax decrease, which is just such a unique pricing structure. So one of those would be a $122 million bond that would build a new high school. $53 million bond would get us a new elementary school and all the basic updates that our schools need. And a 22.3 is similar to what we floated last November, but we have a new pricing structure now that would allow for tax decrease once our current bond runs off at 2026. And so we see we are at about the same point as we hit last time with that $22.3 million bond at about 52%, 48 with the 53 million, and we take a dip with a new high school because, of course, that would be a tax increase. One thing I would like to point out is our yes stronglys go up with the 53 million, which I think is important. As we talk about grassroots and a community swell, we really need some yes strongly supporters. The supporters that care about this, they're willing to pound the pavement, they're willing to do the work. So I actually like seeing that with the $53 million bond. Additionally, the opportunity to build a new school and not have a tax increase is just a really incredible opportunity. It's really exciting.
So Maggie, that
yes.
was with a new elementary school.
So
Correct.
53 million is a new elementary school and everything that was on the 22.3.
And upgrades and, yeah. But
Yes, so all
were-
the essential upgrades, the other schools get love too, and we get a new
yeah, but
elementary.
that was an elementary school specific, okay.
Yep. So this is where we're winning and losing. We lose a little bit with men, those people over age 70. We see a little bit of a breakdown with college education, and we always see a breakdown between homeowners and renters because renters don't know that they kind of indirectly pay for this a little bit as well. And then this is where I was talking about, this is where the November electorate really favors us. Those low propensity voters, we win by 12 points. The high propensity voters, the people that vote every single spring, we're losing with them. And then we see we have closed that gap a little bit with Eagle Creek, which is exciting to see. And then the area that we really struggle is people that have no connection to the schools. They don't have children that went through these schools. They won't have children go through these schools, and they don't currently. So that's a really significant number. But even with current district parents, I would really personally like to see that number a little bit higher. That's pretty low.
Maggie, real quick.
Yes.
When you look at the volume, so how many low propensity voters are there compared to high propensity voters?
I would have to do the math on this one. When I looked at it just briefly off of my recollection, we're in the 20-25% range of our voters are low propensity voters.
Okay.
And that's like a 1/4, which means I voted in 1 out of the last 4 elections. And that includes special elections like came up in this last November. High propensity voters, they're voting on every single election.
Can we see an end size, the number?
Yeah, I have a big, long
Okay.
Excel file that I can send you.
Awesome.
Yes.
Thank you.
Of those that did vote yes, here's what they said. They said it's time for an update. That 35% that just generally supports education, those are kind of our base yes voters. They would vote yes pretty much. They're our ride or dies. They're going to support us no matter what. A lot of people say we need to stay competitive. 8% say we need to address overcrowding. That's great to see that message going out there. That's a lot higher than last time we polled, and that's exciting to see. So that's where that, and then our no voters, I would like to point out, not the right time, need to lower taxes, too much money, can't afford this. Those ones that kind of lumps into an area, that tells me that with education, letting people know that their taxes would decrease with this bond, we might possibly be able to influence some of those people. That trust factor as well, that's something that we just have to continue to chip away at. That is actually pretty low for a community of our demographic where generally there is a little bit of government distrust, but that's still something that we want to specifically target and work on. That's something that concerns me. So we see a lot of price sensitivity right here, which is undeniable, and it's one of the reasons we worked on a bond package that would not penalize taxpayers as much, because we recognize that. 52% of all voters, even the ones that voted yes, said that they think will put a strain on seniors and struggling families. 52% also said it's something that they personally cannot afford right now. So again, some education on the cost package of this. This was after we broke this down into plain language and talked about the cost benefits of this and talked about their taxes, so it's going to be a long battle of educating people on what it looks like and where those taxes are spent. And then also not a priority given the coronavirus pandemic right now, 52%. So that's where some of our really heavy resistance comes in. Another one that I think is just so incredibly important, and this is a big education campaign, our perspective of our facilities. I think it was great that we went on this facility tour because people are not in our schools as much right now with the pandemic, unfortunately. And it is such a good predictor of how they will vote on the bond. 70% of the people that have a negative perception of our facilities vote yes on a school bond. It's huge. So as we can see a little bit, the perception of our facilities has gone up in August of 2020 when people got out of our buildings because they are not in our buildings seeing the leaky pipes and the roofs and all those things anymore. So it's a big education campaign and it has a really strong impact on the prediction of how people vote. I'll just briefly go over this. Safety, safety, safety. Those were the things that polled the best. And you can see the net favor is really strong. Like the vast majority of people that we polled, 65, 66% of people thought that these things needed to be done, thought that our schools need sprinklers for fires. They're just concerned about the cost, how it will impact their livelihood. So I didn't see anything on any of the bond packages we proposed that were a bond killer. Most of the items were pretty well liked. And then this is an important one. In the communications department, we always appreciate getting this news. Where are people learning about their local schools? A lot of people are using local TV news as their news source, and it affects how they vote as well. And then we also see just that political party breakdown as well. It impacts how people vote. So that's one thing to keep in mind in our community in particular. That's a quick overview of where we're at right now based on what polling is telling us. Any questions before I turn it over to Mike Ware?
Yeah.
Yes.
Try to help me out here. We have a current bond that is going to be paid off in 2026.
2025, yes.
2025.
Yep.
And if we go for, let's say, would you say $55 million bond, that is not going to increase taxes.
It would actually decrease your taxes by 2 cents.
You're not allowed to pay off the existing bond, right? We have to pay it month by month?
We cannot pay it off early unless we refinance that bond.
Oh, okay. I didn't catch that part.
So what we would do is we would just wait to pay on that bond, and Director Weiner, jump in anytime. We would wait to pay on that bond till 2026 so we could just replace that bond right as it drops off, offering
Okay.
the unique opportunity for our taxpayers to actually save just a teeny bit of money.
I didn't catch that part of it, and I was wondering how, if we cannot pay off the bond legally, then how are we gonna institute a new bond and it's not gonna go up? Because we gotta make sure that whatever we say we're gonna do, we do it. You know, for credibility purposes, and it just didn't make sense to me, but now it does. Thank you.
Yeah, and I think you are not alone. This is a very unique pricing structure. It's like I said, a great opportunity, but it is a little bit, it almost seems too good to be true. So really, instilling our credibility and explaining how that works, I think is going to be really important. 'Cause
Absolutely.
once you hear about it, it seems like a great opportunity.
Yep.
Is that 55 million, is it a 25 or a 30-year?
It would be a 30-year because it is a new building. I'm okay going out 30 years on a new building because we'll still have a building in 30 years.
And it's, each bond is unique too. Many communities have multiple bonds. And so like a Westland Wilsonville has 3 bonds. And so they just, now that there's 3 bonds in the hopper, as one comes to an end, they just renew. And so it just, that's how you see all these communities passing bonds, is they were already in place. And so they just kind of recycle as it goes through.
Yeah, that's one of the things that
We're
I
not,
hear.
we're not Westland Wilsonville,
Right,
but
right,
yeah.
but that's one of the things that I hear is, hey, you haven't finished the bond
Yeah.
that you're currently paying for.
Yep.
So why are we going after another one? So, thank you for that.
The other
That
tricky thing
clarifies
is
it.
this sense of urgency of you get used to what you're currently paying. So once that bond is over and your tax rates potentially drop, it's going to be a lot harder to add one on and get used to a bond again. It would be easier for people to adjust to move pretty seamlessly into.
We got to make
bond.
sure that they look at the tax line for the school, because you know as well as I do, once they get our hands in our pockets, they don't give you a discount.
Sure do, yep.
The school bond line, just clarifying, the school bond
line.
School bond line, yes. Okay, well, thank you for all the info, Maggie. We really appreciate it. So I just kick it up to the board as a whole. So thoughts,
Next steps.
It seems,
impressions?
well, obvious to me, there's a serious educational piece that's got to happen here. The discussion's been great, and just between this group, we've unearthed things that collectively we put together that now we all understand better. And then the stats up there of the folks like, can't afford it, it's too much, and then, Maggie's explaining it's neutral or less than neutral if we time it right. There's just, I know a next step, whether we go or not, for a bond, we should make sure our community has the resources or a way to be educated on where the dollar goes, every dollar we get, whether it's for facilities or students, makes a big difference in perception.
Yeah, I learned a lot just tonight.
Well, and I think we can leverage Facebook Lives, YouTube Lives, right?
Yes.
I know that the community is tuning into that at a high rate. And so to that end, it's going to take more than one or two. So this is a long educational process. Director Berman's point, right? It took us a little while to get there tonight.
It's just as simple as what money gets spent on students and what money is dedicated to facilities. And there's huge conversation just right there,
Yep, I agree.
the very basics.
I'm wondering, as far as the people like myself, where the kids are out of school now, but the grandkids are out of school, almost all of them, and now I got great-grandkids that are going to start going to school. So I keep trying to be educated as to what's going on. But what about the people that are out here that own homes and don't have kids in the school? How well do we communicate to those folks? I think that's an untouched area that we need to focus in on and get them involved.
I think Maggie and the admin itself have done a good job with quarterly flyers that are direct mailed to everybody in the 97023 and 022 school district, right? Just letting, it's just hey, what's going on at the Escada School District? We have fall sports or we have whatever going on. And I think that's a good outreach. I think part of the problem is, and I think the Patinkin poll said it was like 38% of people rely on local news. And Emily, thank you for all you do. But I don't know what we're penetrating into the community realistically with the Escada News and Channel 8 News and all that. And again, we've done a good job of getting ourselves in front of the camera and being out on the forefront of all this COVID stuff and everything else. We do well, but you know, is it enough to just keep beating that drum and educating people on what's going on?
Well, I'll tell you right now, I'm the one that walks out and gets the mail every day. And I have never seen a piece of paper from the Estacada City School or Estacada school system. Never.
She'll
So
check.
something's not happening correctly.
Are you a registered voter?
Yeah. Damn right I am.
You might talk to your neighbors. I think they're stealing your mail.
But with that in mind, I think we hit on the top 3 items that I had in mind that were the barriers already in this conversation. And if that's the case and we were aware, since we've brought them up so early, I mean, our campaign obviously has to have some other unique features that we're not doing outside of Facebook Live and how we educate the public. So I think we need to be creative. I'm not saying I have the answer, right? But that we need to be creative on how we're educating them, not to dance around what we need to educate them about, but to get in front of as many people as we can, as John said.
Right.
And there's many people who live on Rainbow Road, right, that have no children to go to our school district.
Yeah.
The road that I live on, right? And so, you know, how do I get in front of them to make sure that they're educated about what Estacada School District's trying to do? So, agreed.
I think one of my concerns around next steps is taking too long and being behind again, because I feel like the last 2 attempts, we scrambled in the end, and I would love to have a plan in place of like, here's all the topics of education that we want to reach out to our community. When do we need to get those done? How are we going to creatively get those out there, you know, and make sure we're getting everything while we're doing grassroots and while we're trying to get maybe a pack together and while we're reviewing what is operationally, you know, what's our backlog and our needs and building this bond package so that when we go repoll, we get our answer, you know, are we going or not, based on 55+% yes.
Yeah.
And I just, how do we do that? I mean, it's like, is that somebody's job? Is that like us continuing to do multiple workshops? I mean, how do we do this? Because last time it felt like I wasn't involved enough. I feel like because of that grassroots conversations, right? So how do we do this different?
Well, I think part of it, Rochelle, is we look back last time, right? And when we kicked it off and we said, hey, we're going to wait until we feel good about how we've communicated and how we've messaged. And then it was decided that we're not going to wait anymore. We're just going to do it. And so my answer to that is we do what we're doing, right? We poll, we put together the communications, we try to figure that out, and we do that as long as we have to.
Yeah.
And that's, I think, the difference between the last two times, and for good reason, right? It's not, it just is what it is. But we don't make that move until we can clearly see that over 55% agree and 40% or more strongly agree. And then we use that as our guide to say when we go. So we don't set a date to go until we get to that type of information and continually pull to find what do we need to do differently.
But there's that no-go for November. I'm not
Correct.
saying,
Oh,
right,
yeah,
and then
right.
you kind of reassess and, you know, or whatever. But I feel like what we need to get to is that that repoll. We have this 8-month runway or however long that is. We can't just sit here again and sit back and wait for 8 months and then repoll.
Yeah. I mean,
Christina, can you remind us, or maybe it's Maggie, time frame? So is it March that we really need to start rolling for a November ballot?
The first timeline we would have to follow, for the Awesome Grant, it has to be submitted by July,
Awesome Grant is July.
right? July? Yes. So we would want to know prior to July if we were going out in November.
And just a reminder on the Awesome Grant, it's a up to $4 million match.
It depends on where we land in because it does like a list, and it depends on where we land on the list. But yes, it could be up to Was that a
The
percentage?
previous two times, I think we've had a $4 million match.
Yeah.
It was just a grant from the state.
Yep,
So a $55 million bond turned into a $59 million bond
exactly.
at a
If we
$55
get
million
passed.
rate. And so that's something that really kind of gets the creative mojo going in the right direction, if we can do it.
To come back to your question, Vice Chair Shibahara, I think what I'd like to propose is that the school district does begin some type of educational communications campaign. And the word bond is not necessarily used, but we use the data of the education of what people are telling us when it comes to safety, when it comes to overcrowding, when it comes to how taxes are being paid, and use that as an intentional strategy and then measure again to see if our strategy made a difference. The only thing I would say, and again, it's a team decision, but one thing I've learned in the last bond is we probably do need to seek a professional to help us. I appreciate Director Wheeler and his vulnerability of saying that he didn't do enough, and I'm in that same boat as well. Not from the sense of not necessarily doing enough, but I thought that the good works that we were doing with how we were handling the pandemic and offering school and services, I thought we were going to get different community support with less strategic actions, just out of good faith and goodwill and true pride and investment in a school district that everybody loves. And so that being said, and we also asked our communications director to do full-time communications directing and be the lead of a major bond campaign. And I think, our logistics fell a little bit short in that, which I think ultimately hindered grassroots opportunities. And so I don't have a suggestion other than to say, I think it would be wise of us as we mount an education communication strategy that we get some more help.
I also think not in addition to just in addition to the education piece, I want to continue to get feedback from the community on what kind of bond package would they support.
Yeah.
Because I think we have to do that in parallel to make sure
Yes.
that we're hearing them and what they want, and we're sharing what we think the district wants, and then building that, grassroots
Yes.
support.
Yeah. Yep.
I know this is looking back, so I apologize.
But we can look
Chair
back,
Riddell.
that's good.
Okay. But, it hurts a little bit that the number one is don't trust the district. And so, while I think I understand that can come from many different angles then.
For sure.
I think you've been in front of the public, we've had Mike in front of the public, other folks have been in front of the public explaining what's going on. So I think in my opinion, I think we're doing a great job explaining what's going on in our schools. I wonder how that measure has moved over
Yeah.
the course of time.
Yeah.
Because it still seems extremely high that
Yeah.
we don't trust what we're doing as a district.
Yeah.
And I feel like the transparency is much better now than I've ever seen it in the district. So,
Yeah.
and I know that I'm newer to the community, but it does feel like the district being very transparent, and we're trying to be transparent as board members too by sharing
Yep.
as much as we can. And
Yep.
I would like to know, maybe from a professional or maybe from this group, what can we do more to show that there's transparency there in everything that we're trying to do for the community?
I think that's a great point. And you're right, it is broad, right, what that trust is. It could be government. We're a relatively conservative community. But one thing that did reoccur through the bond campaign and even throughout, and I remember, talking with you, Director Johnson, and Chair Idell, and even Director Wheeler about the historical past of our school district and its prior bonds. And I know that it came up over and over again of how the district in 2000 handled the bond and its finances, and that continued to come up with families who have been born and raised, lived here. And the irony is there's probably not one individual on the board, in the superintendent chair, or even on our payroll that was here in the year 2000 that oversaw that, but that still doesn't matter. That seems to be something that this community has held on to.
Yeah, it's unfortunate. People remember the bad experiences. They don't remember the good ones.
Yeah.
And I think the board and the school as a whole are doing a heck of a lot better than they were 10 years ago. It was a mess.
Yes.
And people like myself that have been in the community for 40 years, you know, we look back and we think, yeah, they did a poor job of
Yeah.
watching their monies and spending. And today, you know, now that I'm on the board, my eyes are open to a lot more than they were.
Yeah.
And I'm leaning towards, we're doing a good job.
We just need to have that conversation with 9,000 more people.
That's right. That's right. I'll give them my phone number.
I'm going to buy John some new walking shoes. He's got a lot of miles to cover.
We have 364 days until next year's
Hockey trial.
November election.
Really?
364?
Yeah.
A year yesterday.
Okay.
Do we want to hear anything about facilities or anything from Mike, or do we want to talk about, I mean, I'm just trying to think of if
You prepared for that?
I would imagine the list of repairs is the same, maybe a little better, and they're more expensive than they were a year ago.
Yeah.
But let's hear it.
Happy to talk about that. We can go just straight to that report. What you have in front of you here is two things, two reports of roughly the 11 million that we spent over the last 5 years or so out of capital. These are the completed projects that were out of our bond list that was created from our facility assistant maintenance plan back a few years ago in 2016.
So these are the ones that have been completed?
Yeah, the one on the
Okay.
left here. And I'll quickly just show that it's roughly 1.4 out of that. And we did add ESSER funds only because some of the things that we're doing in our ESSER funds contribute to what we had on the bond, i.e. the access control project. So again, roughly altogether, about 4 million that we're going towards and trying to keep ticking off that bond list. If you go to the right here, this is where it gets kind of fun. Here's our current capital construction bond project list with our 1, 2, 3 priority rating. And you can see in 2020, we have the cost, and then we just added our inflation costs over the next few years, assuming that if we go out for a bond in 2023 as an assumption. And you can see we still have a number of renovations and additions needing to be done. We did a number of upgrades to our HVAC controls, and we've added the new DDC program, the brains of our HVACs, but it's the pneumatic controls, the actual components to our HVACs that need to be replaced as well. And that's significant because it's a significant cost per each building. As we go further, and I want to highlight, this is all coming from the source of all these top ones are for that facility assessment master planning report. So this isn't just done by the district. This was done when we hired that firm to come out and take a look as part of the Awesome Grant. AC, we know AC, add air conditioning is a big topic, and so that's still on there on that list as well as we keep going down. And we're at the high school now. And feel free to just stop me wherever you like, but stadium seismic, we talked about that earlier. High school seismic upgrades, replacing windows throughout the district and throughout the high school. We have an abundance of encapsulated asbestos in this building and our other buildings. It's safe, it's encapsulated, but we need to safely remove that. Anytime we open up anything, we have to mitigate that, which is added to the cost of anything that we're doing. New flooring, new tiles, additional tiles. Our gym floor is the original gym floor at the high school from the 1960s. It cannot be sanded anymore. It's just the original floor. We have structural and seismic issues at the high school that are significant enough to where we should be applying some seismic grants or be doing some adjustments there as we think about future and being an emergency response center for first responders, as well as just making sure our buildings can withstand that seismic load.
Fire shelter.
Fire shelter, as we experienced not too long ago, right? And we have some makeup or the design of the high school gym needs to be reviewed and looked at, as we talked about at the last bond committee. Galvanized piping, old piping, original piping, electrical, power distribution. We could keep going. We only have 10 minutes, though, unfortunately. And so as we go down to the high school, through the high school, again, pneumatic controls, the recessed area, and we get into the middle school, not as big of a list, but still impactful. We're talking about remodeling the the cafeteria to absorb the capacity or the increase of students coming in. We did do a re-roof not too long ago, so that's no longer on there, but security cameras, ceiling tiles, pavement, river mill. Again, a complete re-roof would be about a $1.46 million project as a complete re-roof. Again, piping is an issue, outdated power. We're stressing our power systems, just to be clear, and I don't need to belabor all this, but because of what we're doing in teaching and learning nowadays with the amount of technology, with these older power systems, it's really stressing to the max. And we're going to the point where we need to do some readjustments because it's getting costly to the district. And as we get further down to transportation, and there's a few areas of points to look at where it's structural, repaving the parking lot or paving the remaining. As I go past this little gray line, this is from the bond committee, our last bond committee. So that's why it's not ranked. And this was what was discussed at that time of what we were considering and what we wanted to look at when we were looking at that $22.1 million bond, I believe. Adding new classrooms, and if we're talking about a $53 million bond, this would not apply because we're actually adding an elementary school. There is some attention that needs to be done at Eagle Creek that we were looking at, IT infrastructure updates, and that's single mode fiber that goes from within our building. We've done it from outside of our buildings, but now the next step to increase the internet capacity is going inside our buildings. Modern flexible furniture, so we talked about that modern classroom, natural lights, blinds, dimmable, collectible lights, controllable rather, excuse me, de-escalation space, private discrete counseling space, and what down to the staff lounges. At the end of the day, if you look at the facility assessment maintenance plan, level 1 and 2, we're at that $23 million mark in 2023, and that's hard cost, right? We don't have soft costs at the moment. We would need to, obviously, if we start talking about a potential bond, bringing in those cost estimators to get us the real numbers. But this is based off what we've done in the past with Cornerstone, with our bond committee, with the professionals that we had on board. If you add the bond committee total, that turns up to be 37 million. However, we know that there's a number of those things that don't necessarily apply anymore if we start talking about a brand new building.
I think one thing to keep in mind is a lot of these things are just, the things are at their end of their useful life.
Correct.
Galvanized piping, it served its purpose from 1960 till now. It's just time for an upgrade. It's not that we've neglected it.
Correct.
It's not that we've neglected the roofs. It's not that we've neglected the electrical system. It's just that we're taxing it beyond what its use was in the 1960s, and you can't just fix it anymore. You have to just go in and gut and redo.
Well, we haven't passed the bond since 2002, correct, or shortly before that. I mean, that doesn't mean we haven't stopped addressing the needs, using our capital funds. I mean, our district has been committed doing that over the last number of years. We're just getting to a point where some of these are sizable projects that we cannot sustain out of a capital fund project account.
And I think that there might be a distinction with, or that might resonate with certain community members that it's not a neglect thing, it's just a useful life. And there's been 10,000 pairs of sneakers on these gym floors for the last 40 years, and they're done. Yeah. And it's time to replace it like your hardwood floors in your living room. So, and I don't know how you sell that or how you package that, particularly on a bond ballot where you get 375 words or 325 words and try to convince people to check yes. But that, I think, would resonate with a lot of people, and they would go, oh, okay, that makes sense. My grandkids, my great-grandkids, and my kids played on these basketball floors, or these baseball fields, or these classrooms. So that's the trick, I think, is packaging that in a nice box that we can give to the community members and go, oh, okay, I can get on board with this. I don't know how to do that, though.
Well said.
Okay.
Thank you.
Like,
Okay. So while we still have a little bit of time, any other topics that you guys want to, well, not other topics, any other comments around this topic that we'd like to further discuss?
We need to officially, you know how we kind of are part of a pillar? Do we need to identify a few people to help maybe go through next steps and help build out some plans and things like that maybe, even just as a subset of a larger group maybe?
You know, honestly, I wouldn't mind also. I know we used Jeremy, who was critically acclaimed. And, you know, at the end of that process, you know, obviously Portland Public and some other bigger districts ended up eating up his time and energy. I almost wonder if it wouldn't be a terrible idea as we think about help, if the board, if we do a small interview process with 2 or 3 different firms and/or companies to help us with that. I mean, I know we're talking 2 things, right? We've got to get the grassroots, but I would also just love for somebody or something to help us devise a 6-month strategy to help us through that process.
Do we know how much that would cost and where the money would come from to help pay for that?
That I don't know. I know that it would most likely be general fund dollars to help us with that.
Is the old PAC still in existence?
Yes. Well, I believe it is, figuratively and legally, yes,
Is there still money associated with that?
there is,
Could that money be utilized for a third party
yes,
so that it's not a hit to the general fund?
yeah,
I don't know if it would cover it, but it might be seed money.
yeah.
So since I'm the new guy on the block, what's a PAC?
A PAC is a political action committee. So because we're a government entity, it's illegal for the school district to go out and campaign for a school bond. We can run a very good informational campaign, but we can't say vote yes. And so there's a group called a political action committee that's comprised of volunteers from around the community who are part of this, and there are vote yes soldiers, ultimately. And so they raise funds, they create the vote yes flyers and the mailers and the advertisements and yard signs. That comes from a separate agency. Yep. And the board can be on the PAC.
Is that a hint, Christine?
So can employees.
Yeah, so can employees.
Subtle hint.
Yep.
If such a group is invented or assembled, I would be willing to throw my hat in the ring.
Ditto.
Yeah.
I would as well.
Yeah,
So,
sounds good.
All right.
This, good job.
Okay, that concludes the
Thank you,
workshop.
guys. Thank you for the conversation. I know it's been long overdue, so
Yeah.
Vice Chair Shibahara, thank you for continuing to bring this up and saying we need to have this, get the information and go through it. So appreciate you for that, and everybody else for the information and putting this together for us. So as of right now then, what I'm going to do is call the, what is this? Workshop to an end, and then we will start the regular board meeting at 7 o'clock. If everybody's good with that? All right, thank you.